Hello, everyone, and officially good morning. Welcome to our February webinar for 2023. Today, we are talking about HR Spotlight on Learning and Development. If you were here last month, maybe you can give me like a quick thumbs up or a heart reaction. Sino yung mga kasama natin dito last month who attended the HR Insight webinar? Go ahead, maybe give me a quick heart reaction. Let me see there. I see someone in the chat said first time. That's also great. I love having first timers here with us. It's always nice to get more people in our little learning community. So we've been doing this almost every month since 2020, but this year we've decided to focus on different HR functions and skills. So on months where there is no special event, for example, if it's June, then we'll probably do a webinar on Pride Month, right? But on months where there are no big things that we want to highlight, then we will go and look at a specific HR function. Last month, we did HR Insights to look at the different predictions that other researchers have and the implications of that on HR. This month, let's kick our HR spotlight off with learning and development. So I'm very excited to start with this because I'm a learning and development professional at heart. Dito ako nag-start ng career, and this is something that I still do until now. Just to introduce myself, since we do have first-timers, my firm is called Elizha Corpus Consulting. We specialize in culture transformation, leadership development, team development, and diversity and inclusion. We work with different companies locally in the Philippines and internationally as well. The companies we work with can be as small as a 20-employee PR firm to huge multinationals spanning multiple countries. We love having that range because, like what I said, what I've been saying earlier, it's always nice to learn about the different contexts, the different goals that all of these companies are going after. Me personally, so just call me Elizha, everyone. No need for ma'am, no need for coach. Elizha na lang, okay lang yun because we're all here to learn together. So just a quick introduction on myself. I did my master's in human resources at Michigan State University. These are my batchmates from the year we graduated. So actually, just if you've been looking at the news, there was a school shooting in Michigan State University last week. That's why we all try to talk about MSU as much as we can to keep that spirit of the school with us. So just try to think about that, keep some of the students who passed away in mind. But yep, very proud to graduate from this school where I did my master's in HR. A lot of the things I'll be sharing with you today, I got from my education in Michigan State University. After my master's, I went to work with Microsoft in their headquarters. I lived in Seattle, Washington for a bit. I was with their global learning and development team, designing, implementing learning programs for 130,000 plus employees worldwide. This picture was from one of the learning events that we did. So very excited, very proud to have been part of that. A lot of the applications that I will be sharing with you today are also from my experience in Microsoft. So tingnan natin your experience. I want to see who we have here in the room. In the Mentimeter, I asked you if you're a learning and development professional or if you're in HR but not in L&D, currently a student, or none of the above. It looks like most of you are in HR but not specifically in L&D. So that's okay, because as HR professionals, we actually need to have a certain level of understanding of all of the functions. Mas magiging holistic tayong mga HR kapag alam natin kung paano nagwo-work yung lahat ng mga aspects ng HR. So of course, it's great that you're here today as well. And then for my learning and development professionals, I'm sure you can relate to a lot of the things I'll be talking about. So feel free to chime in the chat. Okay. So what are we going to do today? In this webinar, we are going to, number one, we're going to learn about the basics of learning and development. What is it and why it is important? So of course, we have to figure out what is it that L&D brings to the table so we can all be more aware of that. Okay, and I'll just ask everyone to please keep yourselves on mute so we can make sure that we don't disrupt our fellow classmates here. And then number two, what are we going to do today? We are going to get actionable tips that we can use to start becoming a strategic L&D partner to the business. Whether you're in HR or in L&D, these are some tips that you can use to bring to your organization. And then, of course, number three, we are going to look at some skills that L&D professionals would need to build so you can thrive in 2023 and even beyond. So today, we are going to answer the top 5 questions every L&D professional must answer. I'm sure you've been asked these questions or you've heard them or you've asked your own L&D counterparts these. Number 1, why is L&D important? Number 2, how do I make training useful for my organization? Number 3, how do I measure the impact of learning? Number 4, keep it in-house or get someone external, meaning hire or outsource someone from the outside. And number 5, what skills do I need to thrive as a learning and development professional in 2023? We are going to answer all of these 5 questions in our webinar today. So everyone, ready na ba tayo? Give me a thumbs up if you're ready to go ahead and let's start digging into our first question. Ready na? Okay. Great. Keep that energy up. Malapit na mag-lunchtime. All right, why is L&D important? So everyone, looking back at 2020, 3 years ago, height of the pandemic, could you please give me examples of how learning and development helped organizations during the height of the pandemic? Go ahead and type it in the chat, please. Quick examples. Ano yung mga nakita niyong ginawa ng L&D? If you're in L&D, what are the things that you had to make sure to deliver on during the height of that pandemic? Okay, virtual training, yes, of course. Virtual seminars, everything switched so fast, right? Naging virtual lahat ng mga classroom dati. Having an online training platform, yes, beyond just virtual classes, having resources that people can access. That's great, Pressy. Okay, webinars, daming webinars talaga, no? I can attest to that because that first month of the pandemic, like March to April, I was in webinars pretty much like 3 to 4 times a week. So it really was so on demand. Yep. Christian, mental health awareness, and usually mental health awareness through like webinars and classes, right? And the great thing is for L&D people, they had to look for ways to talk about mental health in classroom settings or in Zoom settings. All right. Transitioning from classroom setup to virtual. Work from home. Yes, that's the answer I was looking for. So other than webinars, virtual trainings, etc., most of the L&D professionals and HR professionals found themselves having to help their organizations transition from working in the office to working from home. That meant training managers on how to manage people in a dispersed location. That also meant having to create policies for how to use your resources outside of the workplace, etc., etc. A lot of things that L&D and HR professionals had to do to help the company transition. So now let's try to reel it all back in and see, what is L&D in the first place? Bakit ba natin ginawa yung mga bagay na yon? Ano ba yung goal ng L&D? So L&D is a function within an organization that is responsible for empowering employees' growth and developing their knowledge, skills, and capabilities to drive better business performance. Okay? So if we look at it from in a nutshell, ito daw yung definition ng L&D. Please go ahead and read through it. Later on, I'm going to ask you what phrases or words are standing out for you. But before that, let it sink in for a bit. Let's look at how are L&D functions organized, okay? Some companies have a centralized L&D function, meaning there's one team, all of the L&D professionals are there. Usually this is called something like your Center of Excellence for Learning. They have all of the policies, they make all of the curriculum, for example, and that gets deployed to all of the different functions and departments and units, etc. So that's central L&D. Some companies would also have a more decentralized L&D, or sometimes it's the embedded L&D. Think of it as there's a learning and development professional in each of the different departments. I'll give you an example. For example, maybe there's one L&D person in engineering who thinks about engineering learning skills. Maybe there's another person in marketing who thinks about marketing learning skills. Maybe there's another learning and development person in finance who focuses on skills needed by finance professionals. And naka-hiwa-hiwalay sila, naka-embed sila dun sa function that they serve. Okay? So that's what a more decentralized setup looks like. And of course, we also have something like a hybrid or a federated learning and development setup. Sometimes they call it that. What this says is there's a central L&D that gives all of the curriculum and the learning strategy, but there are also learning and development professionals embedded in different functions, usually specifically looking at technical and professional skills related to that function. I'll give you an example from my experience para mas magets natin, okay? So, in Microsoft, we have something like a hybrid setup, okay? When I started my career there, I was in the central L&D team. One of my projects was to look at central learning and development for onboarding. So it was setting the core elements of the global onboarding program, whether they're being onboarded in the Philippines or Tajikistan or in Russia, may core elements na pare-pareho lahat ng onboarding. And that's what I was doing because I was in the central L&D team. Towards the end of my career in Microsoft, before I came back home to the Philippines, I was in the embedded L&D team. I was doing HR for HR L&D, meaning I was looking at skills that HR professionals need to learn, and those are the kinds of things I was working on. Okay? So hybrid yung setup kasi may central at may mga naka-embed. So, to check if we understand this concept, let me know in the chat. In your company, is it more of a centralized L&D, decentralized, or are you in a hybrid L&D setup? Let me know in the chat. What is it like in yours? Okay? Centralized, centralized. And for the students here, it's okay if you don't answer. I know that maybe you're still in school for HR and you're not yet in that experience. Don't worry. Okay? Centralized, centralized. Right. As expected, most of you are saying centralized. So usually for companies that are maybe smaller to medium sized, mas centralized yung L&D. And from your registration, I can actually tell that a lot of you are in smaller to medium sized companies. So it makes sense that most of you are doing a centralized L&D. Okay. There's a question here. Maybe I'll address this before we move on. We are a group of companies that we consider as hybrid. It depends. Look at where your L&D professionals are located. If all of your L&D professionals are in one team setting the learning strategy, usually that's centralized. But if the L&D professionals, there's a different one for each company, then you could be in a decentralized setup. But I think with a group of companies, now you also have to look at it. Your conglomerate, is your conglomerate setting one learning strategy for every single company? Or do they let each company have their own learning strategy? So there's an added layer to your question because you're a conglomerate. All right, so good job, everyone. It's important to know this because this will dictate how you implement your learning programs. So A while ago, we talked about what is L&D, and I told you to let me know what are the words or phrases that stand out to you from this definition. So again, what is L&D? L&D is a function within an organization that is responsible for empowering employees' growth and developing their knowledge, skills, and capabilities to drive better business performance. What is it that's standing out for you? All right. Empowering is what a lot of people are saying. Developing. Empowering, etc. Okay. So here's the thing, everyone. Every part of that definition for sure is important. Learning and development exists because, yes, we want to develop employees. We want to empower them with skills, with attitudes, and mindsets that they can use in their job. But let me tell you now, the most important thing to take note of in learning and development is that we have to drive better business performance. Learning and development exists solely because all of the things we do have to contribute to better business performance. Ang mga tao na natututo, ang mga tao na gumagaling sa skills, sila nagko-contribute sa better business performance. So actually having that increase or development in skills, that's just a way to get to that better business performance. So it's not the ultimate goal that we're trying to drive towards. The goal of L&D is to improve employee and organizational performance and effectiveness. Okay, so again, yes, we are responsible for development and learning, but the ultimate goal is for that learning to translate into performance and effectiveness. There's this diagram, this visual that I took a picture of from a book. So a book that's called High Impact Learning by Brinkerhoff and Apking. It's from 2001. It sounds like it's a little bit old, but it's one of those classic L&D books. If you're interested to learn more, I suggest you look up that book and look for a copy. So this illustrates the logic of training. Essentially, what they're saying is we build capability, but that's not the end of it. That capability has to translate into performance, meaning we have to see an improvement in the way that people do their work, their projects, their tasks, and then that performance must translate to results. We have to be able to show that there's a business impact to what we're trying to do. Okay? So yes, again, we are here to build capability, but that's not the end of it. Pag tinanong kayo next time, bakit ba may L&D? Bakit ba important na may L&D? Ang sagot is not because people need to learn. Ang sagot is because we contribute to business results. Because L&D is key to providing organizational performance and effectiveness. All right? So now let me ask you, now that we know why L&D is important and what L&D is, what challenges have you encountered as an L&D professional? For the people who are in HR, in general HR, I'm sure you've had some sense or you've had work with L&D. Maybe let us know, like, what are the different challenges you observe that your L&D counterparts are experiencing. So everyone, go ahead and on that same Mentimeter, you are going to type your answers there. And don't worry, this is anonymous, so I won't see your names. What challenges have you encountered as an L&D professional? Great, I love that for someone. They said none. How about for the others? I see someone here in the chat say choosing the right people for the job. Yes. Also that kind of putting the right people for the right situation that they're needed for. Yes, buy-in from management is something we hear a lot. Budget. Totoo yan. Naririnig ko yan sa clients ko. Okay. Lack of materials, yes, which almost always stems also from lack of budget or lack of management buy-in. Actually, budget, right? kind of stems from management not having enough understanding or enough buy-in of L&D. Getting 100% response rate from surveys. Yes, and you know what? Actually, 100% response, even in psychology, when they do surveys, they try not to target 100 because it's impossible. Sometimes even just a 60% is already good enough. In some companies, especially the big ones, 30% would already be good enough. So it really depends. Okay. Limited knowledge in L&D. Oh, all right. Yeah, but it's good that you're doing webinars like these, right? Okay. Kahit na-explain na or na-discuss na, laging sasabihin ng employees, hindi maalala yung diniscuss. Yes, because as learning and development professionals, one discussion is not enough, right? We know that sustainability of learning is very important. All right. So lots of things, lots of problems, lots of challenges, but what makes learning and development a worthwhile endeavor? So bakit nga ba meron pa ring learning and development kung maraming challenges? Recently, last month or late last year to last month, there were lots of layoffs in the tech world. I'm sure you've seen that, like Google, Microsoft, Facebook, etc. Some of the roles that get impacted first are talent recruiters. So yung mga natatanggal usually una ay talent recruiters and then L&D budget. Kapag ka nagko-cost cutting ang mga kumpanya, usually yan yung mga unang nawawala. So bakit important pa rin sila kung lagi silang unang nawawala? So here's what we have to think about. Researchers would say that the only sustainable competitive advantage is the ability to learn. Peter Senge is one of the big names in organizational development. He actually is an engineer. He's a systems scientist, and he is the founding chair of Society for Organizational Learning. So he's one of the biggest thinkers in that field. Way back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, Peter Senge already said that the only sustainable competitive advantage is the ability to learn. Learning and development professionals do not just teach concepts and skills. We are there to cultivate the kind of environment that would help people see that learning is important. We exist because we have to create a culture that tells the company that learning is an ability, a muscle that they have to practice. If you think about it, in the world that we live in now, change happens so constantly. Yung skills na sabi nila 5 years ago are important are completely different now. And so, if you just focus on a specific skill, magiging irrelevant ng mabilis yung learning and development. Learning and development exists because you want to give people the capability to learn, to know their learning style, to understand why they must learn, to be comfortable with the discomfort of not knowing so they can be curious to learn. So again, this is ultimately the biggest function that we have to be providing for our companies. We have to create a learning culture in our organization because it's essential to thriving in an uncertain world. A learning organization is a company that has enhanced abilities to learn, adapt, and to change. These are the kinds of companies that can experiment. They're open to trying things out. If they fail, they can learn lessons from that failure so they can adjust and make better products and services moving forward. Learning and development is directly related to contributing to that learning culture. One of the things I love so much about being a learning and development professional is that we are directly part of building that kind of environment for our organizations. So again, this is about creating a learning organization. It's a company that has an enhanced capacity to learn, to adapt, and to change. Now, you might be thinking, how will I know if my company is a learning organization? what are the different characteristics or criteria that I have to look for? In this book, they gave some questions that you can kind of ask yourself to evaluate the state of learning in your own companies. Let's go through these questions. Number 1, does the organization have a defined learning agenda? May nakadocument ba? May nakasulat ba kung ano yung guiding principles when it comes to learning? Do they say what are the important things? What are the core skills? And are those core skills in alignment with the company's mission, vision, and purpose? So again, a learning organization has a defined learning agenda. Sometimes you might also think about it as a learning strategy. It's called different things, but at the end of the day, dapat naka-document siya and nakasulat na ito yung mga skills na importante para sa company natin. Okay? Number 2, is the organization open to discordant information? Meaning, are people in the company open to discussing differences in opinions? Is dissent welcome? Are sensitive topics talked about or hidden under the rug? Kapag ka ba may nagbibigay ng opinion na siguro hindi agree si leader kaagad, okay lang ba yon kay leader? Do they let people talk about that? So these are some characteristics that you can observe for. Number 3, does the organization avoid repeated mistakes? Are people actively applying their learnings? Do they debrief after projects so they can try to see, saan ba tayo nagkamali? Paano natin i-prevent yan sa future? Or, paulit-ulit lang ba yung mali and yung challenges and no one bothers to correct those processes? Number 4, does the organization lose critical knowledge when key people leave? When people retire or resign, do they also take what they know with them? Or do you put systems in place so that knowledge is documented or so that the key people will share their knowledge through mentorships, etc.? And number 5, does the organization act on what it knows? Meaning, ang mga tinuturo ba natin na skills ay na-translate to behaviors? The things that we deploy in our learning materials, for example, nakikita ba natin na ginagawa siya ng mga tao when they interact with each other, when they do their projects? Do they behave in alignment with that? Does information spread through the organization? Nagsha-share ba ang mga tao sa isa't isa ng mga alam nila? Or tinatago lang nila sa department nila yung mga alam nila and they don't try to help improve or spread that knowledge with others? These are the 5 basic questions that you can ask yourself if you want to evaluate whether your organization is a learning organization or not. Okay? So it might be good to reflect on these when you have some time after this webinar. Again, this portion is about why is L&D important. We said 2 main things. Number 1, L&D exists to contribute to organizational performance. And number 2, we are important because we contribute directly to creating a learning culture. And that is number 1. Why is L&D important? Let's jump to number 2. How do I make my training useful for my organization? I'm sure if you're an L&D professional, paulit-ulit na tong natanong sa'yo, okay? So let's talk a little bit about this. Just to set your expectations, because this is a short webinar, of course, I will not go very, very deep into everything, but my goal is to give you some suggestions and some things to think about, right? And then before I proceed, there's a question here in the chat. How do we build a culture of learning in the org? The tips that I'll be giving today, the things we will go through might help you with building that learning culture. Okay, so we are on question number 2. How do I make training useful for my organization? The goal is to create high impact training. High impact training means integrating performance improvement strategies and tactics into the training process. When we do that, it increases the likelihood that learning translates to performance and ultimately the achievement of business goals. Let's break that down a little bit, okay? When we create learning, we want it to be high impact training. Ang ibig sabihin nun daw ay ways that people can improve their performance tangibly. It's built into the process of training. Translating that in easier terms, ang sinasabi niya, huwag tayo magpa-training para lang magturo ng isang topic and tapos na yun. When we think of training, it has to be that whole process of how will people apply this skill? How will I give them the opportunities to apply that skill? What will they have to observe for in their everyday work life to know if they're applying that skill? Paano ko iti-train yung managers ko para mabigyan nila ng mga chances and coaching yung tao nila to apply the skills they're learning? Everything is integrated in and aligned when you have high impact training, okay? So again, we want to build high impact training. So how do we do that? One of the things we can look at is the training design process. The training design process I will show you today is based on instructional design principles, and also, as a lot of you probably have heard, it's on the ADDIE framework. So ADDIE, ADDIE model: analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. Okay? What we will talk about today is just a more fleshed out version of ADDIE, if you will. Okay, so where do we start? Everything starts with conducting the needs assessment. We have to understand the needs in 3 different levels. Number 1, from the organizational level. This means knowing the goals of the organization. Where do they want to go? What are the results that they want to see? So you can align the skills that you will be working on with those goals. Number 2, we need to have a person analysis. Now, all right, let's see. Is anyone else getting an empty screen? Let's just do a quick check. I got a comment that there's an empty screen. Okay, then, all right. If you are getting an empty screen, try to log out and log back in again. Maybe it's a Zoom problem, but thank you for letting me know. All right, perfect, everyone. So the second level of the needs analysis that you need to pay attention to is your person analysis. Looking at the people in the roles, what are the gaps that you need to close in terms of skills, for example. And then task analysis is looking at the role. So for example, if someone is a compensation analyst, ano ba yung mga task na ginagawa ng isang compensation analyst? So siguro nagko-compute ng, for example lang so let's give a very basic example. Nagko-compute ng contributions ng mga tao. So dahil task yon, now we have to know ano yung mga pwedeng learning methods for that specific task to be taught to the people in those roles, okay? So 3 different levels: organizational, person, and task. And again, it's very, very important that we start with conducting the needs assessment. Especially, it's very important to understand the goals of the business. Right. Next up, the next step of the training design process is ensuring employees' readiness for training. This one is about looking at the attitudes and motivations and the basic skills that people have. Are they ready to get into the kind of learning process you're thinking about for them? When I work with my clients, I always ask them, for example, when was the last training that the participants attended? Kamusta? Ano yung reactions nila to that training? When you know how people react to learning, it helps you to understand how ready they are for different levels of experiences that they will have. Basic skills, also very important. If you look up statistics on reading proficiency in the Philippines, very, very sad because we are actually way below average. So there's an organization called the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. They evaluate different countries on reading proficiency and comprehension. The average score is 487. And in 2019, in the Philippines, we were only at 340. So something to be aware of, right? As a society, medyo nagkukulang tayo sa basic reading and comprehension skills. So when you look at your own employees, it might be also useful to see those kinds of basic skills because that will help you to know if they're ready for more advanced topics. Sometimes I get requests for business communication, business emails, writing, things like that. But when you dig deeper, it's actually a skill on like reading comprehension and critical thinking that maybe they need more. And email, writing reports is just an application of that kind of skill. So again, it's also important to look at the readiness of your employees for the training that you're thinking of deploying. Next up, now you have to create the learning environment. This doesn't just mean the classroom or the Zoom room or the Teams room. Creating the learning environment starts with defining the learning objectives. You have to be crystal clear about what it is that you want people to take away from that program that you are designing. Learning objectives, something that can help you write down those objectives into statements would be the Bloom's taxonomy. I'm typing that in the chat. If you have trouble writing out your learning objectives, try to look up the Bloom's taxonomy of learning. It'll give you different verbs with different levels of outcomes, of learning outcomes. You can use that to begin writing. Kapag walang learning objectives, mahihirapan kayo gumawa ng training. So it's very important to start with that. And then of course, you have to think about program implementation. Are you targeting a specific group of individuals? Are you targeting a specific field, a specific unit or department, or is this company-wide? If it's company-wide, how will you deploy it? Leaders first, top down, or employees first, bottom up? Think about what makes the most sense for the learning environment you want to create. Next up, ensuring the transfer of learning. So this one is really just about thinking through how will you make that transfer sustainable? What are the different ways of implementation that you can consider? Next, you have to develop an evaluation plan. You have to figure out, how do I know, how do I measure if people are actually learning from the training program that I will implement? And then this is when you select a training method. Given all of the things you know, does it make the most sense to do in-person, to do hybrid, or to do virtual? A lot of people, I notice, goes there first. They think first of where they want the training to happen and then backtrack into thinking of topics. I would suggest try to do it with the needs analysis first para sure tayo na kailangan yun ng mga tao. And then think about the topic, and then think about, how do I deliver this training, in person ba or virtual? It makes more logical sense, and it helps you to ensure that whatever you're suggesting is aligned with the organization's goals. And then, of course, we have to continue by monitoring and evaluating that program. Now, my question is, given the training design process that we talked about, what are some possible problems that you can foresee? Ano ba yung mga critique natin about that process? What's something that could be wrong about it, if you will? Let me know in the chat. Just your initial reactions, right? What would be some things that are not so good about the design process I showed you? Right, yeah, it doesn't take into account organic interest. Great. That is very, very much a critique of that training process. Yeah, I'm seeing people say interest. That's perfect. So actually, that's one of the critiques, right? Where does interest come in? So I would say, Having a needs assessment is actually a great way to also surface that interest. You can always ask people, what is it that you think you need to learn? Knowing that interest can also help you develop employee readiness. In reality, minsan, kailangan muna ibigay natin kung ano yung interest nila before we give the essential training. Why is that? That's because we want them to be excited about learning, so they are more primed and ready to get into the real essential skills. The reality of learning and development is it's not always this clean cut. We don't always have the luxury of following one step to the other in a logical manner. Minsan, ang reality ay hindi na tayo nakakapag-needs assessment. Wala nang time mag-learning needs analysis. And so nagjo-jump na tayo kaagad sa learning environment. And that's the reality of being HR or L&D professionals, right? We don't always have the time and the budget to do all of these things in sequence. But here's the thing. So of course, take that reality into account. But number two, in the absence of being able to go step by step, iisipin natin, pwede ko gawin in place of the step that I'm skipping. For example, what if wala ka na talagang oras mag-learning needs analysis? What can you do instead of that? My suggestion is, number one, have a meeting with the leader. Ask them, what are the goals of the team and how will learning support that? So kahit 30 minutes lang na meeting, at least you have an idea of what you're aligning towards. Another suggestion would be, think about what data you currently have. Maybe you have an employee satisfaction survey. Maybe you have a climate survey or a culture survey from last year or 2 years ago. Look at that and try to use it as a foundational database. So again, hindi natin palaging magagawa lahat to in sequence, pero dahil alam natin kung anong importante, we can try to find ways to gather information even if it's not a full needs analysis, for example. All right? So, L&D initiatives, as we saw and what we've been talking about, must always start with a deep understanding of organizational goals and context. We cannot just from nowhere say that this is what people want to learn. We have to be crystal clear about understanding where the business is, where the business wants to go, and how learning will support that journey of that organization. Okay? And then next up, that was question number 2. Question number 3, how do I measure the impact of learning? A while ago, we talked about how to make training impactful. Now, we will talk about what are the different ways that we can see if it was impactful. So, ito na yung measurement question na laging tinatanong sa atin. There are so many models on this, but one of the ones that I personally like is the Phillips ROI model. So, ROI or return on investment model. Let's go through it together. At the base is reaction or satisfaction. The question you're answering here is, did the learners like the program? Usually, when people have evaluations after the workshop, it's just about satisfaction. Did you like the food? Did you like the venue? Did you like the speaker, etc.? Though it's good to ask those questions, it's not going to give you the best measures. So very base level lang siya. Okay, next up, learning. Did the learners learn the content? Meaning, did it actually give them new knowledge? One of the great ways to do this is by doing pre-post tests on the skills. So sometimes I do this for my workshops where I give people a pre-test of questions on the topics they will be taking in the workshop and then ask them again at the end. The third level is implementation. Did the learners deploy the learning on the job? Did they actually use it? Did they actually apply it? One of the things you can look at here would be asking your managers, for example, looking at their performance ratings, their performance evaluation reports, that will help you to see if the employees actually used your learnings. So of course, that's not everything, but that's one way to do it. Observation will also be a great way to qualitatively look at implementation. What I mean is, siguro mag-set aside ka ng one day to observe those employees. Tell them, I'll shadow you in your job. Let's go to the meetings that you're going to. Let's look at you actually do the tasks or perform your projects, and then try to see if they are actively applying the things that were taught in the workshop. Next up is impact. The question here is, did the learning impact business results? Business results isn't just about financial gains. It's also about the things that matter in terms of the performance of that team. For example, if it's a sales team, do the customers say that they have good customer service etiquette? If it's a hospital, for example, are the patients saying that they feel the care from the employees? So look at the business results, not just in terms of the money, but in terms of the results that are important for that organization. And then last is ROI. So now we get into making actual computations. So did the learning investment pay off? This is about balancing your costs versus the value that you gain. So now it gets a little bit tricky because it depends on what the company wants to measure. I'm going to tell you now that even though there are models on measuring impact of training, there's no one method to do it. Walang isang correct way of measuring learning. All right? That means a lot of it will depend on the learning and development professional and the HR professionals working together with the business to define what is important. Kapag alam mo kung ano yung important business results na tinatrack nung team na yon, then you can align your measurements with that. For example, if I'm working as a learning and development professional for a sales team, I know that a business result they need to see would be increase in sales. Kung nagpa-training ako on sales techniques, dapat mako-compare ko kung ilan yung sales before the training and after the training. So then that already gives you one concrete measure. For learning and development professionals, it's just about being smart and looking at what is the data that I could use? What is the data on hand that I can correlate with the learning that I'm deploying? Data gathering and analysis with the goal of forming business insights are key to measuring impact. As learning and development professionals, data is our most important tool. A lot of people think that L&D is just facilitation, right? And making sure people have fun, have games when they go to team building, etc. But really, L&D professionals work with data. That is our bread and butter. It will help us to show the importance of the different things that we do. And yes, good question. So usually causation is unclear. That's the hard thing about L&D and HR in general, I would say. That's the hard thing about people practice in general. That's why it's important to have that relationship with the business. You have to be working with the business leaders to say that even though causation is not clear, we know that this is what we're tracking towards and we're all in agreement. You cannot say, for example, for certain that your training is what increased sales, right? And I don't think we should claim that. So learning and development professionals should not claim that. But if you agree with the business leaders that looking at the sales increase is one of the factors that we will use to measure if the training is valid or useful, then that will at least help you give some numbers, some idea or baseline, if you will, of what's happening. So yep, a lot of it is knowing what could be related, and most important is agreeing with the leaders around you that this will be something that we will measure to help us give the context. And then number 3, it's also knowing that there are so many other factors involved. That's why you are working with other HR professionals. because you know that there's a whole other environment around that employee and not just the learning environment? Good question. All right. So now I'll give you some ideas. Again, like what I said, it's not everything. This is not a full workshop. We are here for a very short time, if you think about it. But I'll give you some ideas that we usually suggest to clients if they just want to know where to start. This might be a little bit basic for some, but just try to see if there's something here that you can apply. Okay. So okay, hold on. Walang audio. If you're having audio issues, try to disconnect from Zoom and then connect back in. So far, I'm not seeing anyone else have audio issues, so maybe it's more of on your end. All right, some ideas. One easy way is to do pre and post assessments. The pre and post assessment can be on knowledge, so actually asking questions about the topic, or it could also be about perceptions. Thinking about the person's way of looking at the topic you're teaching. I'll give you an example. So let's say, for example, that the topic I'm teaching is on self-leadership, okay? Leadership. And then my pre and post assessments will have to have the same questions. From a knowledge perspective, I could ask questions like, what is leadership? Define self-leadership. And then I'll see if they change from the start to the end. From the perceptions aspect, the questions could be around rate your estimate or rate your performance as a leader from 1 to 5. I coach my employees at least once a quarter. Agree or disagree, there's a Likert scale to it. Or I believe that as a leader, it is my job to give feedback. Agree, disagree, Likert scale. And then you look at the pre-workshop survey and the post-workshop survey and compare the differences in the results. All right. Next up, we have to align with already available organizational data. So for example, if you have annual employee surveys, if you already have climate surveys or culture surveys, these are things you can look at. Try to see which items apply with the learning that you want to deploy. And then the next time you run that data, you can see a change year over year. Same example, if the workshop is about leadership and in my annual surveys, there are questions about, I trust my leader. For example, then you're able to see, did the scores of that team change from before your workshop to after that workshop? So it's about looking at data that you already have. Number 3, example could be measuring change in performance ratings. For some companies that still have number ratings, I know for some companies like Microsoft, we don't have number ratings anymore. But for others, if you have performance ratings in numbers, then it'll be easy to see the change in that number. I would suggest, though, beyond the number, it's actually important to look at the justification of that number. What are the behaviors that managers are seeing in their employees? And that will help you to measure the change. And then number 2, you could also work with the business to track relevant financial data. So for example, you could ask your finance people, okay, so how much money are we saving from people who are not leaving the company? How much did we spend on training last year versus this year? If we take into consideration the training that has to happen for people who have to keep on joining because people keep on leaving. So there are data points like that that you can look at and see like what would make the most sense. Again, it depends on what makes sense for your company and the leaders. It depends on what makes sense for the field or the industry and the topic that you are deploying. There's a question here that maybe it would be good to answer now. When do you recommend to administer the post-test? Right after the training or at least 2 weeks after the training to ensure knowledge transfer? I actually do it not right after the training. So what we do right after the training is more satisfaction surveys. And then maybe 2 weeks to 1 month after, we do the post-test. For some topics, for example, leadership, if there's a continuous program, like we do activities even after the workshop, then usually I would give the post-test 3 months to 6 months after, because there's a longer impact that we want to track. So yep, it really depends on the impact that you want to track and if you want it to be something more long-term versus not. Okay? All right. So next up, that is question number 3. Let's do question number 4. Do we keep learning in-house or do we outsource it? Let me ask some of you now. Where do you spend most of your training budget? What topics, for example, do you spend most of your training budget on onboarding or more on specific professional and technical skills? Or is it on leadership training? Like, where do you spend your learning budget? Technical skills, personal development, technical, job specifics, technical, okay. All right, yep, so as expected, technical training. And now let's see if that makes sense given some of the impact investments that are suggested. We all have limited budgets, right? And so it means we have to make the highest impact investments that we can. There's actually a model that Josh Bersin suggested way back in 2004. So Josh Bersin is one of the biggest names in management consulting. According to Josh Bersin, there are 4 different ways we can think about where to invest, okay? It's a bit of a busy visual, so let's go through it one by one. If you look at the vertical axis, it's comparing customization versus off the shelf. Off the shelf meaning yung pwede mo na lang bilhin somewhere, hindi na kailangan i-customize to your organization. On the horizontal axis, it's about what it contributes to the business. Is it more an operational thing where it's just necessary to run that business? Or are these the kinds of training that will really help you be more strategic and win in the market? Okay, let's go through it per quadrant. Kasi kino-compare niya yon based on the combination of these 2 conditions. Number 1, so naka-label yan, just follow along. Number 1, the first quadrant, this says that these are the programs that need to happen regularly and are specific to your organization. If that's what you want to do, then your programs have to still be custom to you and they are integral to running the business. I'll give you examples para madali natin maintindihan. Think about onboarding new hires, new manager training, doing skill-specific training to use your own systems. Let's say you have a machine that only your company uses. Then that means those kinds of trainings have to be customized to you. You have to either make them in-house, kayo yung gagawa, or partner with a consultant or a facilitator who will help you to customize that training. Okay? So it's very important that it's customized because you want to be able to share your own company's culture and systems and processes that are specific to your company. That's quadrant 1. Quadrant 2, if you think about more generic skills, okay? For example, of a generic skill, Microsoft Excel training, Microsoft PowerPoint training, public speaking. These are more generic skills that really you could get something off the shelf. It doesn't have to be as customized because if you think about it, every professional will need those skills. So there are lots of learning providers that will give you that kind of off-the-shelf canned experience. All right, quadrant 2. Quadrant 3, now this is saying that there are still generic skills, but now there are some generic skills that are directly aligned to your organizational goals. For example, management trainings and leadership trainings. So many programs offer management and leadership trainings, right? But you have to figure out which ones are going to help you win in the market, which ones are going to help you stand out as a company. So you have to still be careful with choosing the kind of programs that you will provide. Like what I told you, this is an old model, right? If I were to change up this model, I would say that management and leadership skills should now actually be in custom programs and not off the shelf. Why is that? Because in the world that we live in now, more than ever, there's uncertainty and there are lots of changes happening. So you need to make sure that the core things that are important to your company culture are instilled in the leaders that you have, which means you cannot just get something off the shelf. You have to make sure that that consultant or facilitator will align exactly to what you're looking for and what your company needs. So that's maybe just one thing I would change if I had my way. But some other examples of generic skills that are important to your company could be things like customer service strategies. So maybe those are some of the things that you could think about, that there are off-the-shelf versions, but it's important for your organization. And then the last quadrant, number 4, this is where your high impact programs exist. This is your secret sauce, if you will, na dapat gagawin mo siya ng magaling because it's what separates you from all of the other companies. For example, maybe these are training programs related to your culture. You have cultural values and you have specific programs for each of those values. For example, if your company's goal is to expand in different countries in the next few years, how are you giving people multicultural skills to do that? How are you giving people the business acumen to understand expansion? So now these are the highest programs that you need to pay attention to because these are directly related skills to the goals that you want to accomplish, okay? What this model says is you have to invest most of your budget and time and resources to those high impact programs. All right? So dapat yun yung pinapag-isipan natin ng mabuting-mabuti. Leslie, good question. If we buy off the shelf, how do we ensure that the speaker is equipped? I have some questions later that you could use to evaluate. And so the question now that we want to answer is, should we keep training in-house or outsource? It really depends. It depends on different considerations like time, budget, the expertise of the L&D professionals, the expertise of the possible consultant, and the appetite for learning of the organization's leaders. I'll tell you now, for example, that there are some companies who want customized leadership programs, but they don't have enough budget to do it. And so what ends up happening is you have to kind of find a way to get something off the shelf and then deploy it. The learning and development professional will just have to add some added messaging to make it specific to them. So that's a reality we're in. Another reality is, what if you want to keep it in-house, but you as the L&D professional, you do not have that skill or that expertise? So then maybe it makes sense to look at a consultant who can give you or bring that expertise in. There are different considerations, so that's why I don't think there's an exact answer to what you should outsource or not. It really depends. And it's about you as the L&D person evaluating according to these 5 considerations. So now, how do we know which learning provider to go with? So take it with a grain of salt because I'm a consultant, so maybe I have some bias seeping into my tips. But as much as possible, I tried to think about my role before as a learning and development professional. I was an L&D in a company before, and I was evaluating training providers. These are the different things I would look for in the training providers that I will work with, okay? So number 1, make sure that when you give your requests for proposals, include the reason for wanting that training in the first place. I see so many training requests that just say, we want leadership training, and that's it. Try to be more specific, because if you don't give those details, then your provider will not know what you're looking for. So talk about what prompted the request for that training. What are the concerns maybe that you're trying to address? How many people? How many participants? Who are they? What are their roles? What are their levels? These are background information that will help. Number 2, as an extra tip, try to ask for a call as much as possible. If you really want to make sure that the training provider will be equipped to customize for your company, ask them if you can get on a quick call, 30 minutes. I'll give you some questions that you can ask after this slide. It's important because the more you know about the training provider, then the more you can evaluate if it's a good fit or not. Number 2, look at online presence for surface level validation of credibility. I think this is pretty standard naman, di ba? Tingnan natin, okay ba ang Facebook page, ang website, LinkedIn if meron, and it's just a good way to see if it's legit or not. Next, explore if they have resources available to the public. Try to see if they already have videos or written documents, watch it, read it, see if it's the kind of vibe, if you will, that you're looking for your company. Next, search for consultants on LinkedIn and verify their credentials as much as possible. It's very easy to look people up on LinkedIn these days. Look for the people who are managing that company, where they're from, what they studied, what companies they worked with in the past. And then in general, observe the consultants. Once you're in the call with them, try to see, are they asking you questions to understand your needs, or are they just pushing their services to you? I think mafe-feel nyo naman yun if the person is trying to understand where your organization is coming from or just selling. And then from there, see like what works for you and what doesn't. In general, I have some questions that you can ask. I always appreciate it when learning and development and HR people ask me these because it tells me that they know what they're looking for, and it'll be so fun to partner with them as we try to create high impact training. First question, tell the consultant, give me an example of clients you've worked with in the past that are similar to my organization in industry and size. Okay, try to get examples because past behavior, that's the best predictor of future behavior. And then number 2, can you give examples of how you know your programs have worked in the past? Paano nila measure yung mga ginagawa nila with their clients? What are some techniques that they have done with their clients? Number 3, walk me through your thought process of coming up with your suggested workshop. How did you design this to fit my needs? Once they give you a draft outline or proposal, ask them, bakit ganito? Bakit yan yung mga suggestion mo? Paano niyan matutugunan yung mga pangangailangan ng organization ko? Number 4, what suggestions do you have to measure training effectiveness? Ask them, for my organization, given the context I've told you about, how do you suggest that we measure this moving forward? Number 5, what are the qualifications and experiences of your consultants and facilitators who will engage with my organization? Do they have a background in HR or in a field that is relevant to the topic? So please, what I'm telling you now is, minsan kasi nasa sense ko na nahihiya yung mga L&D professional or HR professional magtanong sa consultants. Please ask these questions. You have the right to do it, and honestly, it will lead to an even better relationship with your consultant if you're able to ask them these questions. So ako as a consultant, I enjoy it greatly when we talk about these things. And I look forward to maybe having you ask me these questions in the future. So that is it for question number 4. We are moving right along, and it's our last question. What skills do I need to thrive as a learning and development professional in 2023? There are some essential L&D skills that we need to think about. Number 1, business acumen. We've been saying on and on that understanding the business goals is so important. You have to understand, ano ba yung ginagawa ng kumpanya ko? Paano kami kumikita? Anong financial status namin? Kumikita ba kami? Lugi ba kami last year? These are all business information that will help you to help the business. If you are an L&D person, work with the different leaders to understand what skills they think their employees need. Number 2, stakeholder management. Nowadays, learning happens with a lot of people involved. It's your employees, it's the managers, it's the other HR counterparts you have. If you have someone you outsourced, it's your consultants, facilitators, facilities manager who will clean the room, your tech company that will provide logistics, etc. You have so many people that you need to worry about and think of, and stakeholder management becomes one of the important skills. Learning and development managers also have to be project managers, okay? You have to be the one gluing everything together, making people accountable to deadlines and tasks that they say they will do. Number 3, instructional design. Honestly, even just a basic understanding of the learning process will be okay. Sometimes people ask, kailangan ko po ba graduate as an instructional designer para maging L&D professional? Not necessarily, no, because instructional design is a specialized field all on its own. At the basic level, you have to understand the design process, saan nanggagaling ang content sa needs assessment, and paano mo siya i-implement as you deliver that training broadly across your organization. Number 4, data analysis. I know it sounds a bit overwhelming, but honestly, if you just look up some articles or YouTube videos on quantitative versus qualitative data, anong pagkakaiba ng isang survey sa isang focus group discussion? These are things that you'll need to do as L&D professionals because data is our tool. Descriptive statistics, taking averages, mga ranges, understanding ranges and outliers. These are things that you can use to better describe your data. Correlations are also important. Correlation simply means trying to see if may relationship ba yung dalawang bagay. It doesn't necessarily mean na may causation siya. So, for example, diba, correlating that someone who went to leadership training also gets higher leadership scores. You can do a correlation on it to see the relationship, if it's positive or negative, if it's significant or not, without necessarily saying na kaya gumanda yung leadership score ay dahil nag-training. So hindi naman yun yung gusto natin sabihin pag correlation, but it's a good data point to have. And then you can do comparison tests. So now with comparison tests, you can see, for example, significantly different ba ang score ng leader na yon bago sila mag-training to after that training. Then it will give you a better picture, if you will, of the difference that the training made. Comparison tests, I'll type out what I mean by these para if gusto nyo siya i-research, gusto nyo manood ng videos about it, you can look for it. So sample of comparison tests in statistics are t-tests or ANOVA tests. So I suggest look those up, see if you can learn more about it. Number 5, you need marketing basics. Before, I think this was in 2016. In 2016, one of the biggest jokes na totoo naman that people are saying is learning and development professionals will have to be influencers. So you have to figure out how do you activate people across the organization to be engaged and interested in the learning you're offering. Paano mo ma-market yung training mo para sabihin ng mga tao, wow, ano yan? Gusto ko try yan. Sign up ako dyan. So it's about those kind of activation techniques, if you will. And then it's also social media marketing. Social media, quote unquote, because it's more of marketing your learning using your internal tools, like your internal chat platforms, newsletters that you send through email, etc. You have to understand your audience para alam mo kung paano magiging interesting para sa kanila yung training na ini-invite mo sila to attend. Okay? So there's a little bit of marketing involved, which is a newer skill, if you will, that L&D professionals will need to take note of. And with that, everyone, those are our top 5 questions every L&D professional must answer. Let's do a quick review. Why is L&D important? We said that L&D is important because we get people from just building capability to contributing to organizational performance. And we are directly related to creating a learning culture that is so important to thriving in the world that we live in. Number 2, how do I make training useful for my organization? We said that we have to create high impact training, and there's a training design process that we can recommend so we can think about it logically. Again, sabi natin, hindi palaging masusundan yung proseso na yon because in reality, maybe we don't have time or budget. But knowing the process can help us look for alternative ways to get the data that we need. Number 3, how do I measure the impact of learning? We talked about the ROI model, but also we said that the reality is learning and development professionals have to work with the business to talk about what are the things they need to measure, what data points are important so we can make those relationships with the training that we're deploying. Number 4, keep it in-house or outsource. We said that it depends. We have 5 considerations to think through. And then we also looked at what questions you can ask to evaluate your future learning providers. And number 5, what skills do I need to thrive as a learning and development professional? It's about business acumen, partnering with the business, a little bit of instructional design, stakeholder management, being able to manage that project, so a little bit of marketing involved. That's a very exciting opportunity for learning and development professionals these days. If we think about it, the way people learn, nagiging parang YouTube at TikTok na siya. I'm sure if you've gone to YouTube or TikTok, you see that learning is bite-sized. Short videos that have a lot of information they pack into sometimes even less than a minute with the case of TikTok, right? People want bite-sized learning. People want learning on time. If they think about a question, they want to be able to search for it and find the information. How do I create a pivot table? They want to be able to type it in and find a YouTube video to teach that. So learning is bite-sized and on demand. Learning is for you. So it's made for the user so that it's easy for you to have that learning experience. Learning is also made by you. Nowadays, a lot of people create their own learning content and share that, like TikTok and YouTube. Sometimes it doesn't have to be a trainer who's making the training videos. It's an actual person with just something they learned that they're sharing. Learning is bite-sized, on demand, for you and by you. So the question is, why don't we all just learn from YouTube and TikTok, right? If that's what people want, di ba dapat nag-YouTube and TikTok na lang tayo? Bakit kailangan pa ng learning and development? My take on that is, the benefit of having a strategic L&D function is in the integration and alignment that we provide. Your L&D professionals understand the business. So they know what the organization is trying to do. They know what the people are ready for because they have that context. And so they're able to marry all of these information together, skills and capability needs, business needs, people needs. They can put all of that in integration and align all of the projects and initiatives so everything makes sense. Your L&D professional is there to make sure that everything makes sense, that everything is integrated. We're making full use of the resources we have, and everything is aligned. All of these things that we do are eventually contributing to the business performing and the business being able to thrive in the kind of uncertain world that we live in. So again, we are here because we provide integration and alignment, something that YouTube and TikTok will not be able to give to your companies. So everyone, that's it for our time together. Thank you so much for giving this time to learn about L&D. We did a spotlight on learning and development. So just very quickly, what's next? Please connect with us on Facebook and TikTok. We regularly post our sessions over there. So all of the information, you'll be able to find it on Facebook. Also, request for a certificate by answering the evaluation form I'll be linking in a bit. We are going to be strict this time that the form will only be open for 2 hours. So I will tell you now, we are a very small firm, small team, and we have a lot of clients, but we do these free webinars because we love learning with you and from you. So please, form is open only for 2 hours, and we will be strict about that starting this February. And then also certificates will be given within the week to your email. So please just watch out for that. Let me now link the form in the chat so you can all have it. Hold on. I am typing it in the chat. And there we go. So please go to the form. It's tinyurl.com/HRspotLD. And of course, stay tuned for the next webinar. We have one at least every month, and or book a call with us if you'd like to talk about more your organization's needs and how we can partner. So everyone, thank you so much again. Usually this is it. This is the last part of the webinar, but if you all have any questions, I invite you to stay. I'll be staying on for the next few minutes. For those who want to go to lunch now, pwede naman mag-lunch. Go ahead and have a great Tuesday. Have a great rest of your week. So bye everyone. To those who already need to go, I'm putting the link again in the chat. And then I'll start answering the questions that I skipped over earlier, okay? Please, if I skipped over your question, type it again in the chat if you want me to answer them, if you think they haven't been answered yet, okay? So while I am scrolling to find the questions, sa mga aalis na, thank you so much. I'll see you again next month, everyone. Looking forward to it. Okay. Let me just scroll back up. All right. There's a question here. Is it necessary to be an RPM or a registered psychometrician to be a learning and development professional? Honestly, not necessarily. I know that nowadays, most of the people who graduate psych actually do the boards, and that's great. I think if you find a chance to do the boards, go for it. That's a great credential to have. But in general, if I look at the hiring boards and the job postings, hindi pa naman po siya strict requirement ng maraming companies na dapat RPM ang mga learning and development professionals. And that is because having an RPM or being a psychologist or a psychometrician is not actually the core skill of learning and development. I would say it helps a lot with data. I'm comfortable with data because of my psych background. I was psych undergrad, and I can do surveys and do those data gathering analysis skills because of psych. But in reality, the skill really is more HR focused, meaning it's more about like business acumen and stakeholder management. So yes, RPM and being a psychometrician or psychologist is a good, super good factor, but it doesn't necessarily mean na dapat lahat ng L&D professionals may RPM or may psych background. Okay. Question, do you have a training program to be an L&D trainer? I haven't run one in a while. I haven't done it in a while. If the demand is there, baka pwede namin itry, but usually we would do something like that for more private companies. Okay. Is L&D, okay, good question. Is L&D and training and development the same? For the most part, yes. Training and development used to be the old like version or the old name, but a lot of companies transitioned to naming it learning and development because training kasi may connotation na workshop lang siya, di ba? Like pag sinabi nating training, parang nasa isip natin, yan yung event or yung activity na pinupuntahan ng mga tao para matuto. Nowadays though, it's more than that. Learning and development is actually a strategic partner to the business, right? We talked about this. We actually look at the skills and capabilities needs that will help with the organization. So I think we use learning and development as the term because it's wider and also it implies the strategic nature of the function. So tama naman pareho, but I would suggest let's use learning and development para we're also helping to push the strategic aspects of our function and na-improve natin siya. Okay? Scrolling back up, if I have questions I missed from earlier, please type them in the chat so I can get to them. But right now, I'm looking at the old ones from earlier. Okay. Hold on, let me just check. I saw a question earlier. About how many L&D professionals. I'm trying to look for it. Hold on. Let me, because it was I got some private messages also that I am trying to look for. So just very quickly, thank you for your patience until I get to this question. I see some questions about slides. I won't send slides, but the recording will be posted on YouTube, so you can get it from there. Okay, there we go. I found it. So for small to medium enterprises or companies that would like to implement in-house training, how many L&D professionals do we need to have in our organizations? Oh, okay, good question. So I would say it really depends on how extensive the learning program is that you are trying to build. If, for example, if you're planning to have an onboarding program at least once a week, then that would imply that that one person is just doing onboarding and medyo out na siya for like 1 to 2 days for a week, right? So I would say the number of L&D professionals would depend on the frequency and the extensiveness of the training that you want to provide. So I don't know if that, I hope that helps, because sometimes the way I think about it is it's not so much like how many employees that's the biggest factor, but it's more of like how much work do you foresee the L&D function will do. Because sometimes a company can be small, but if they have a lot of training that they need to run, edi dadami yung kailangan na L&D. Versus some companies, maybe they're big, but they don't have a lot of learning like focus on their agenda that they want to do. So then it doesn't make sense to have a lot. Also, a lot of times, the number of L&D people will be dictated by the number of HR professionals. So HR professional is probably that's where you can get a better ratio of what's recommended for your company size and industry. Okay, good. Thank you for putting the questions here. Do you have suggested books about creating good evaluations and assessments? Yes, I do. Let me grab it for you. Hold on. Okay, so take a screenshot of this book. Yes. It's pretty old, so you might be able to find it cheaply. Yes, okay, so it's called A Practical Guide to Needs Assessments by Kavita Gupta. This might be a good start for you, okay? So in the book, they have a lot of like actual like assessments, naka-survey format na siya. So you'll laugh, but before, do you young people know what this is? So before, because this is such an old book, it comes with a discount. That doesn't even work anymore. So ayun, if binili niyo tong book, baka manually type niyo na lang yung mga survey because it might not come with a discount anymore. All right. Questions about recording. When will the recording be posted? I try to do it the night of, but latest within the week, and we share it on our page, so you'll see when it's up. Okay, can we assign each department head as the L&D professional? I don't know if I understand the question properly, but the way I understand your question is you're asking if the head of that department, like the manager of that department, if they could be the L&D professional. I would say maybe they can do L&D functions, and yes, they have to do some L&D functions to some extent, but it would really depend on what kind of tasks you're asking them to do. Because in reality, the department heads are focused on running their own departments. I would assume that's what you mean by department head. And so adding that L&D function might make it a bit heavy on them. It might be better to think of it as partnering with the HR person, the HR business partner who is assigned to that department. If you use them to partner with from an L&D standpoint, that might actually be like a more efficient way to do it, if you will. So try to see how you can work with the HR person assigned to the department, and then they will be able to help you decide how much L&D work the department head could probably take on. Okay. Hold on. Let me just, so many people laughing at the floppy disk. I'm glad some of you still know what it is, right? Okay, questions about certificate. Yes, if you do the form, so please make sure you do the feedback form that I put there in the chat. Okay, I saw a comment here. We are making some supervisors as SMEs. We are training them T3, train the trainer, while the L&D is still the center for all learning in the organization. So yes, that's kind of like a decentralized embedded aspect, if you will, right? That makes sense also that some supervisors are train the trainers. Okay, now I see the context here. So maraming BPOs, for example, do this, right? Like the team leader would also be trained in being trainers so they can deploy the skills. So that could be a good example as well. Okay, just scrolling through. There's a question here. Do you have any expertise for business partnering, as it's also one of the L&D functions? So for business partnering, one of the things you can do is to look at more general HRBP kind of learnings. So for example, maybe you can look up HR generalist webinars, or webinars catered towards HR generalists and HRBPs. That might give you the skills that you need to understand the business. Also, in general, try to take some business courses or business classes. Kasi dun mo makukuha yung understanding of like what is the value of the business, what are the different metrics that you can look at to evaluate the profitability, etc. So probably you have to go outside of L&D to build some of that business acumen. But it's great, right? Because multidisciplinary is the name of the game these days. What was the book? This is the book. The book is A Practical Guide to Needs Assessments by Kavita Gupta. All right. So everyone, I don't see any more questions. I think it's a great time to let you go for lunch. Have a great lunch. Have a great rest of your February. And I'm going to see you all again next month. Bye.